Imagine waking up one day to discover that everything you thought was your strength, your ability to think deeply, to question, to perceive patterns others misses, precisely what's isolating you. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no dramatic expulsion, no glaring spotlight of persecution. It's quieter than that, more elegant. You're simply not invited, not included, not chosen. You sit in a meeting, offering a thought that cuts deeper than the surface-level conversation. People glance around, uncomfortable. You watch your words sink like stones into a still pond, no ripples, no replies. Later, someone parrots a diluted version of your idea, stripped of nuance, and suddenly it's celebrated, applauded, and you sit there, half smiling, knowing exactly what just happened, but you tell yourself it's fine. It's not a pattern, until it happens again and again, until you begin to feel that thinking too much, seeing too clearly, is a kind of curse. How did it come to this, that intelligence, once revered as a virtue, now flickers quietly, like a candle in a room filled with neon distractions? When did clarity become a liability and conformity to the new form of social capital? You watch people float on the surface of life, fakeing opinions, scrolling endlessly, mistaking noise for insight, and you wonder, is there something wrong with me for wanting more, for seeking truth, depth, coherence, for seeing the absurdity, and saying so? But here's the paradox. The more clearly you see, the more alone you become. The sharper your perception, the duller your connection to the collective. You're not punished overtly, but you are silenced by exclusion, ignored by convenience, dismissed with subtle condescension. Intelligence doesn't make you powerful in a conformist world. It makes you expendable, dangerous, an outlier too. Be gently sidelined. And so, the question, is intelligence a gift or a sentence? We are taught to believe that the brightest minds shape the world, that those who question, who innovate, who understand the systems beneath the surface, are the ones who lift us forward. And yet, look around. The systems that thrive are those that reward repetition, not originality, approval, not awareness, clever branding, not brutal truth. Why do societies punish the very minds that could save them? Why does intelligence threaten the status quo? It begins in childhood. You ask too many questions. The teacher shifts uncomfortably, glances at the clock, and says, "Let's stay on topic." Your peers roll their eyes when you bring up connections they hadn't seen. You're told you're too intense, too serious, too complicated. The message isn't shouted, it's whispered beneath every interaction. Dim yourself to be accepted. Simplify to survive. And eventually, you do, a little. You hide your real thoughts behind neutral smiles. You nod at nonsense. You learn how to speak just enough truth to sound thoughtful, but not so much that you unsettle the room. And you wonder, is this what intelligence is for? Self-censorship? Strategic silence? You begin to see that intelligence, in a conformist world, must become a performance to be tolerated. Wrapped in humor, disguised as charm, masked as humility. The raw form unfiltered insight, naked clarity is too much, too piercing, too real, like staring into the sun when everyone else is admiring the shadows. And so, many intelligent people become actors in a play they never auditioned for, pretending not to notice, pretending not to care. They laugh when others laugh, even if they see the hollowness beneath it. They celebrate what is popular, even when they feel its emptiness, because to reveal the truth is to risk being seen as arrogant, difficult, or worse, irrelevant. But what if this isn't just a social quirk? What if it's a systemic defense mechanism, one that protects mediocrity and punishes clarity? What if the world you live in wasn't designed to nourish depth, but to suppress it? And what does that mean for you, if you are one of those people who sees through the veil? Because if intelligence becomes a burden and conformity the currency of belonging, then every intelligent soul must ask themselves, do I choose connection or truth? This is the invisible fork in the road, the psychological exile, the silent crossroads every deep thinker eventually reaches. Do I betray myself to belong or remain true and risk being forgotten? The world whispers, make yourself smaller, but something in you screams, no. So the real question is not just why is intelligence punished, but rather can it survive without being buried? Can it thrive in a world built to smother it? And what would it mean to reclaim it, not as a tool for approval, but as a sacred form of rebellion? Let's pull back the curtain and expose the architecture of this invisible punishment. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with precision, because once you see the system, you can no longer unsee it. It begins with a question most never ask. What is society actually designed to do? We're told it's to uplift, to civilize, to progress. But beneath the rhetoric lies a more uncomfortable truth. Society, at its core, is built to maintain cohesion. Truth, order not, insight, harmony, not evolution. And in that fragile, unspoken equation, intelligence becomes a threat. Not the domesticated kind of intelligence, data, recall, trivia, technical know-how. That kind is useful, that kind of thing gets celebrated. But the kind of intelligence that questions foundations, that notices contradictions, that dismantles illusions, that's the kind that unsettles the machinery. And unsettling the machinery is dangerous. Carl Jung once said, the shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. But society still insists there is. That the good life is a one-size-fits-all structure of ambition, performance, and assimilation. True intelligence often sees that structure for what it is, a mass hallucination, a myth handed down like an heirloom, unquestioned, unchallenged. But when you begin to question that myth, you disrupt the shared dream. You rupture the illusion that keeps people comfortable, and comfort, for most, is preferable to truth. This is the first root of the punishment. Intelligence is exiled because it sees too much. And when you see too much, you unsettle others, not with malice, but with clarity. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about bad faith, the human tendency to lie to ourselves in order to avoid the anxiety of freedom. Most people, he believed, would rather live in comforting falsehoods than confront the weight of their own freedom and responsibility. An intelligent mind, then, becomes a mirror, and people hate mirrors that don't flatter. You say something honest in a room full of pretending, and suddenly the temperature drops, not because you were wrong, but because you were right and they weren't ready. Nietzsche, too, warned us. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But in today's world, most people aren't living by their own why. They're borrowing someone else's and influences, a traditions, a corporations. They mistake the noise for meaning. An intelligence the kind that looks for real why shatters their borrowed maps, which leads to the second root. Intelligence is punished not because it's wrong, but because it forces others to confront what they've been avoiding. This is why intelligent children are often labeled troublemakers. Why thinkers are told they're overcomplicating things. Why are truth-tellers dismissed as cynical or difficult or just too much? Because intelligence doesn't just challenge systems, it challenges comfort. And most people, consciously or not, will defend their comfort like it's life itself. Arthur Schopenhauer suggested that truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Then it is violently opposed. Finally, it is accepted as self-evident. But most intelligent people live in that first stage for a very long time, mocked, dismissed, labeled outliers. And herein lies the tragedy. The more attuned your perception, the more likely you are to be misunderstood. Not because your perception is wrong, but because others don't want to, or can't, see what you see. There is a profound loneliness that comes from being able to articulate what others only vaguely feel or avoid entirely. This loneliness often mutates into self. You begin to wonder, maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I do think too much. Maybe I should just let things be. But what you're really asking is, should I amputate parts of myself to belong? Because that's what conformity demands. Not just silence, but surgery. You don't just have to hide your insights. You have to unfeel them, unsee them, unthink them. You have to pretend not to know what you know. And that leads us to the third root, the internalized shame of intelligence. Intelligent people are often gaslit, not directly, but through 1,000 subtle cues. They are told their standards are unrealistic, their insights are negative, their intensity is exhausting. And over time, they begin to internalize the idea that their mind is a liability, not a gift. They shrink, not because they want to, but because shrinking is rewarded with belonging, and expansion is met with suspicion. In a conformist world, rewards are given not for originality, but for mimicry. The louder you echo, the more you are accepted. The more you reflect consensus, the more you are trusted. But what does that do to a society to reward imitation and punish vision? Aldous Huxley once warned that the future would not be shaped by tyranny, but by distraction. That truth would not be censored, but drowned in irrelevance. And in that world, intelligence doesn't just become inconvenient, becomes invisible. Not because it lacks power, but because it has no platform. And so the intelligent suffer in silence, not because they are weak, but because they are too strong to play dumb, too awake to sleepwalk through life. What you're feeling is not your fault. It's not because you're broken. It's because you live in a system that sees your clarity as a threat to its comfort. But don't turn your light down, because the world may not reward it, but it needs it more than it knows. You've been conditioned to believe that you are the problem. That if only you could chill, smile more, think less, you'd be accepted. But what if acceptance isn't the goal? What if awakening is? What if the punishment of intelligence is not a sign of your failure, but proof of your clarity? You don't notice it at first. The shift is quiet. You stop speaking up in meetings. You laugh at jokes that don't make sense to you. You begin to scan every interaction. Will they understand? Will this make them uncomfortable? Should I just nod instead? That's how it begins, the slow erasure of your voice. But it's not just personal. The consequences echo outward. When intelligence is punished, society doesn't just lose a voice. It loses a mirror, a compass, a future. Let's start at the level of the self. When you are intelligent in a world that demands conformity, your identity becomes fractured. You split yourself in two. The inner world, sharp, rich, vast, and the outer persona filtered, edited, performative. And that dissonance is exhausting. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance, the inner tension that arises when our external behavior doesn't match our internal beliefs. For the intelligent, this dissonance becomes a permanent state. You know what's wrong, you feel what's missing. You sense what others overlook, but you must constantly suppress it to avoid alienation. This is more than discomfort. Over time, it becomes pathology. Studies in psychology show that people who chronically suppress their authentic thoughts and emotions are more likely to develop depression, anxiety, and even psychosomatic illnesses. The soul doesn't die in a single blow, it dies in silence. You begin to question your own instincts. You feel lonely, even in a crowd. You distrust your mind not because it's wrong, but because it never gets reflected back to you. No resonance, no recognition. And that's the most painful punishment of all, the loss of psychic mirroring. We become human by being seen, not just our faces, but our depths. When your thoughts go unacknowledged, unreturned, unrecognized, yourself begins to dissolve, not physically, not visibly, but spiritually. You start to fade, but it doesn't stop with the individual. There are societal consequences, massive ones. When intelligence is punished, the culture slowly dumbs itself down. It begins to mistake popularity for wisdom, consensus for truth, performance for insight. Look around. We glorify virality, not virtue. We elevate the digestible over the meaningful. We confuse confidence with competence. And in that confusion, the intelligent are pushed to the margins, while the persuasive rule the center. It's not that the world lacks intelligent people. It's that intelligent people learn to hide, to protect themselves, to survive. Imagine a generation of deep thinkers who stopped sharing their thoughts, a wave of visionaries who self-censored to fit in. What do we lose? Innovation, reform, revolutions of consciousness. Because when intelligence becomes a liability, progress becomes impossible. We see this in history. Galileo imprisoned for challenging religious orthodoxy. Socrates sentenced to death for corrupting the youth with questions. Hypatia of Alexandria, a brilliant mathematician and philosopher, brutally murdered by a mob fueled by ideological fear. And it's still happening only now. The execution isn't physical, it's social, it's professional, it's reputational. You don't get burned at the stake, you just don't get the job. The platform, the invitation, you're not silenced. You're just not heard. This quiet exile is reinforced by cognitive biases that run deep in all of us. One of the most insidious is the status quo bias, our tendency to prefer things as they are, even when they don't serve us. Add to that the confirmation bias, seeking information that aligns with what we already believe on. You get a culture that resists disruption at all costs. Intelligence, by its very nature, disrupts. It connects dots others don't see. It challenges assumptions. It sees alternatives. And that makes people uncomfortable. And what makes people uncomfortable gets pushed away. You see it in education. Children who ask too many questions are labeled difficult. Gifted students grow bored and disengaged because they lack curiosity, but because the system rewards compliance, not curiosity. You see it in workplaces. Innovators are sidelined for not being team players. People with nuanced opinions are seen as indecisive. Those who raise uncomfortable truths are branded negative, And worst of all, you see it in relationships. When depth becomes a burden, people start performing shallowness just to stay connected. We end up with partnerships built on compatibility, not intimacy. Friendships built on repetition, not resonance. And love becomes just another place to hide. It's no wonder so many intelligent people feel exiled. Not physically, but existentially. They're not rejected for who they are. They're just never fully met. And that's the cost of a conformist world. We don't just lose the thinkers, we lose the medicine. We lose the evolution. We lose the soul. Imagine a society where intelligence wasn't punished but cultivated, where insight wasn't a threat but a gift, where depth wasn't seen as difficulty but as direction. But we're not there yet. Right now, we live in the shadow of that possibility, in the in-between, where the intelligent must choose every day. Do I dim myself or risk exile? Some fade, some fight, but most just endure. And that endurance is heroic, because it takes incredible strength to see clearly in a world that begs you to go blind. But what if endurance isn't enough? What if it's time to stop surviving and start rebelling? There comes a moment quiet, electroquent survival is no longer enough. When you realize that shrinking yourself isn't safe, it's self-erasure. That moment is the beginning of rebellion. Not a rebellion of fire and fists, but of mind, of soul, of being. Let's be clear, this rebellion will cost you comfort, approval, the illusion of belonging. But what you gain is yourself, entire, undiluted, unapologetic. So how do you begin? It starts with a single, radical act. Refusing to pretend. Refusing to laugh when the joke is hollow. Refusing to nod when the logic collapses. Refusing to silence your mind to make others feel taller. Not out of arrogance, but out of devotion to truth. Because pretending is a form of betrayal, not of others, but of yourself. And every time you betray your inner clarity for outer harmony, you confirm the lie that you must be smaller to be safe. But you don't have to be. You were not meant to fit in. You were meant to illuminate. Consider the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet wrote to himself daily about not being corrupted by the masses, not being dulled by the court. He knew the danger of conformity wasn't physical, it was spiritual. To thine own self be true is not just poetry, it's strategy. You preserve your mind by using it, not hiding it. Or take Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps not by compliance, but by meaning. He found a sense of purpose even in unimaginable suffering, and it was that inner purpose, that inner intelligence, that allowed him to endure. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, he wrote. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That's rebellion. The refusal to let the world shrink your spirit. So how to you rebel, practically. 1. Begin with brutal inner honesty. Ask yourself, where am I pretending? Who am I performing for? Where have I silenced what I know to be true? You cannot fight a lie while living one. You cannot illuminate others while dimming your own light. This is not an invitation to arrogance. It's an invitation to alignment, to let the inside and the outside match. 2. Create sacred spaces of truth. Find even-build relationships where your intelligence is not just tolerated, but nourished. This may mean letting go of certain friendships, walking away from shallow circles. Yes, you will feel lonely, but that loneliness is different. It's not the ache of exile, it's the silence of becoming. Read thinkers who stretch you. Engage in conversations that spark, not soothe you. Start writing, journaling, speaking, even if no one listens at first. Your voice is your rebellion, your clarity, your compass. 3. Redefine what success means to you. The world defines success in units of conformity, followers, income, applause. You must define it in units of integrity. Ask, am I living from truth? Am I creating what only I could create? Am I thinking thoughts that are mine, not adopted, not inherited, not borrowed? Because the ultimate rebellion is this: to live on your own terms in a world that sells you. Prepackaged meaning. Think of Leonardo da Vinci. He was dismissed in his time for being too scattered, too different. He dissected bodies, sketched flying. Machines questioned dogma. He never quite fit. But centuries later, the world still stands in awe of what he dared to see. He didn't conform. He created, and you must do the same. Maybe not with canvas or inventions, but with your life, with your thoughts, your courage, your refusal to disappear. 4. Transmute alienation into art. Intelligent people often feel exiled. But exile is not the end, it's the beginning of myth. The greatest art, literature, philosophy, was all born from those who were not accepted by the world, but who saw it clearly anyway. Rilke once said, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror, just keep going. No feeling is final." That's your rebellion, to feel, to think, to stay awake, even when the world seduces you with sleep. 5. Accept that you will be misunderstood. This is perhaps the hardest part. You will be seen as aloof, arrogant, strange. You will lose people. You will be judged. But consider this: if shallow minds understand you, you're not saying anything deep. If everyone agrees with you, you're not thinking for yourself. To be truly intelligent is to be alone, but not lonely, because your solitude will become sacred, a space where your thoughts can stretch, where your voice can return, where your soul can speak in its native tongue, and slowly, without forcing, you'll find others, not many, but enough. Fellow rebels, thinkers, seers, those who are tired of pretending, those who have stopped dimming, and then something incredible happens. You stop feeling punished, because you realize it wasn't you. It was never you. It was the world, terrified of what it could not yet understand. You were the future, walking through the present, too early, too clear, but no longer alone. So let this be your turning point. Let your clarity become your courage. Let your difference become your direction. Let your intelligence become your insurrection. Not loud, not violent, but unstoppable. Because the greatest rebellion isn't to fight the world, it's to remain fully yourself within it. There is a moment after the exile, the doubt, the rebellion, when a new kind of silence emerges. Not the silence of suppression, not the silence of being unseen, but the silence of clarity. It feels different, still, wide, and in that stillness, you understand the truth you were never told. You were never meant to belong to this world as it is. You were meant to help birth the world that could be. That is the ultimate realization. Not that your intelligence is a flaw to be hidden or a weapon to be sharpened, but that it is a seed of another reality. You were punished not because you were wrong, but because you were early, because every structure that now feels permanent was once unthinkable. Every truth we now accept was once heresy. Every visionary was once alone. And so the punishment of intelligence is not a final verdict. It is an initiation. a sacred fire that forges what cannot be faked. Conviction, vision, depth. You begin to see. The world doesn't fear intelligence. It fears the mirror intelligence holds up. It fears what must change if you are right. It fears who must awaken if you are heard. But this fear is not yours to manage. It's not your responsibility to make your insights more palatable, your questions more comfortable, your mind more marketable, because the moment you dilute your truth to be accepted, you have accepted a version of yourself that isn't real. You weren't made to be palatable. You were made to be powerful, and power doesn't come from conformity, it comes from coherence. When what you think, what you feel, what you say, and what you do all align, not with others, but with something deeper, something sacred, call it truth, call it soul, call it what you will, but you've known it your whole life. That whisper that says, there's more than this. That ache that says, don't settle for what's easy. That fire that says, stay awake. You've mistaken that whisper for a burden. But it's not. It's your compass. Yes, intelligence isolates, but it also liberates. Yes, it unsettles, but it also unshackles. The world wants comfort. You want clarity. The world wants ease. You want meaning, so you have a choice. Live the life others expect, or live the truth you were born with. Only one of those leads to peace, and it's not the one paved with applause, because applause is not the same as alignment. Acceptance is not the same as authenticity. Fitting in is not the same as belonging. True belonging only happens when you are fully yourself, when you no longer contort to the room you're in, when you no longer edit your thoughts to survive the moment. And here's the paradox that frees you. Once you stop seeking to belong, you finally do. Not everywhere, not with everyone, but in the right places, with the right souls, and that's all you ever needed. Not universal approval, just sacred recognition. So let go of the idea that intelligence needs to be validated. It doesn't. It needs to be lived, fiercely, quietly, elegantly, unapologetically. Let it reshape your relationships. Let it guide your decisions. Let it choose your silences and sculpt your words. Let it become your architecture. Because the truth is this: you were never being punished. You were being prepared. Prepared to hold a kind of truth most people can't yet carry. Prepared to ask questions most people are too scared to voice. Prepared to see clearly in a world built on distraction. And yes, that clarity will cost you, but it will also save you. It will save you from false lives, from shallow identities, from empty pursuits. It will bring you back to something older than society, older than approval, something primal, something eternal. Yourself, not the version you perform, not the version you edit, the real one, the deep one, the one you abandon to survive. You don't need to abandon her anymore. You don't need to exile him anymore. You are allowed to return. You are allowed to think as deeply as you do, to feel as fully as you feel, to speak as clearly as you can. That is the gift. That is the calling. And the final truth. Intelligence is not a threat. It's a light. But in a world addicted to shadows, every light looks like an offense. So let them fear you. Let them misunderstand you. Let them whisper, mock, mislabel. Just don't dim, because someone is watching. Someone is listening. Someone is waiting for someone just like you to say what they've always felt, but never had the words to speak. And when you do, you won't Just free yourself, you'll free them too. So speak, see, think, rebel, and let the world reshape itself around the clarity you refuse to hide. This isn't the end, it's the beginning. The return, welcome back,